And this is like the pen tool inside of Illustrator. And what I can do is I'm just going to draw the shape of what I want the button to look like. Okay, so if we need to arcade, I'm searching arcade buttons over here, and you can see this is what the buttons look like. Okay, and if we look at it from a different perspective, we'll be able to see, you know, more of that direction or angle or look of what they look like. Okay, so they're like this, right? And they have a little cap on top of them like that. So that's what we're going to draw here. So I'm just going to draw first a little platform. So I want to keep this indent, okay? And I don't want to lose that. So I'm going to keep the indent, so I'm just going to go about here. And then you can see this is the pen tool like this, so I'm just going to go a little bit up like that. And then I'm going to go down here like this. And then I'm just going to click like there. That should be sufficient. Okay, then I'm just going to switch back to my move tool and click off. There we go. So that shape right there. Now we're only drawing half of this, and eventually it's going to revolve around. Now I'm going to grab my spline tool again. So I'm going to switch back to object mode. I'm going to switch back to the spline pen, and I'm just going to create a button. So this is going to come up like this. Oops. I'm going to click and drag. Click and drag. Click and drag. And click right there. Okay, so there's my button. Now it might not be perfect. I can always come back and adjust it. But that's where I'm going to start with this shape. So now what I need to do is I need to revolve this. So I'm going to hit the middle mouse here, hit the middle mouse there. I can't see where it's at because it's actually like right inside of all of this. Like there they are. Okay, so it's no big deal. I'm just going to grab both of them anyway. I'm going to hold down Alt. I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to go to lathe is what they call it. Okay, now it's doing this because it thinks that it wants me to spin it around here. So I need to adjust that so it doesn't do that. Just so it's easier to see, I'm just going to take these and just hide all of this stuff onto this layer. So I'm just going to right click and just say add objects to layer. There we go. And then I can turn the visibility off for these. I don't know why the other ones didn't go. Let's go here. Nope. I guess it really does want me to go into each one of those and hide all of them. Okay, so I'm just clicking this purple here. That coincides with that. So there we go. All right. So now let's go to these splines here and here. Back to object mode or model mode. And my pivot is currently right there. So that's why it's doing it, because it thinks that it wants to revolve around this point, not the point that's over here. So I'm going to hit O so we can get close to it. There you go. O won't get us close to it. I have to zoom in. I'm going to click on one at a time. So I'm going to click on this one. My move tool is way down here at the bottom. I can't see it. And then I'm going to go under I always forget which menu this is in. Spline. I'm looking for Axis Tools. Axis, there we go. Axis Center. Cool. This is where I need to go. Tools, Axis, Axis Center. And I need to move the axis so that it is right over here. So if I were to, I went to the tool, it did this. Okay. If I adjust the X, you can see how it's moving the X along that space. Okay, so now the pivot is in the right spot. Let's go to the other one, and it's in the same spot too, because we have this open, we clicked on it, and it worked. So now when we go to this tool over here and we go to lathe, they will lathe around each other. Okay, now they're not perfectly centered. It doesn't need to be at the moment. I'm going to tweak it anyway. Let me just middle click here, middle click there. Let me go to this spline here. Okay, and I'm going to switch to point mode. This lets me edit the points of the curve. Okay, so I can just click on them and move them. I can zoom in, I can click on the handles and adjust the handles. I'm just clicking and dragging. And what I want to do is get something that looks more realistic. So I need to see like these two views at the same time. Okay, so I'm doing that. Somewhere over here is another point. There it is. Just going to slide this further in towards the middle. Okay, and that looks pretty good. That looks like a button. So now I can just take this lathe and just adjust its position for the whole thing. Just move the whole thing so it's lined up. There we go. Okay, so there it is. So there's my button. So I can take this and this. I'm going to Alt-G that and say button. Then I'm going to use the top view to actually like place where the button's going to go. So I need to turn my layers back on. I went way too far out. And I'm going to place one, make sure it looks good, and then I can adjust it for the other ones. Okay, now what I'm looking at while I do this is this edge. So watch as I move this around. You can see how close these two edges are. Okay, so right there they're really far apart. So as I bring them closer together, okay, now they're touching, but the other side isn't. So as I move this down a little bit and over a little bit, this is helping me get a nice centering. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered, but we just want it to be close. So now when I come here and hit O, I can see where this is at. Okay, it's a little bit high, so let's just slide that down. Okay, and I'm not liking how small that is. So no big deal. I can hit T for scale. And then I'm not going to touch this at all. I'm just going to click and drag out here. And that'll make the whole thing bigger. There we go. So I have a little bit of a dip button here and that. And I think I also want to take maybe the button itself, like the this piece right there on top. And I want to just click and drag to make that whole thing bigger as well. I think that'll be nicer to have that just be a smidge bigger. Okay, and I'm making sure before I start duplicating that all of those pieces are lined up and they look like they are. Okay, now I could also go in here and just maybe add a couple more subdivisions. So instead of this being 32, I'm going to set this to be, let's say 48. And the same thing with the other one, we'll set this to 48. I'm also going to go to my spline here, and instead of the angle being 5, let's set it to 2. And instead of this one being 5, let's set that to 2 as well. Okay, now that should create a really nice smooth transition for all of these. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the button, middle click, go to the move tool, and I'm just going to control or command and drag this over. Okay, and again we get it close enough lined up. Now these two buttons here and these two buttons there should be likely placed, so I'm just going to duplicate this and slide these into position using the same steps that we did in the other one. And if it's more comfortable for you to do one at a time, then do one at a time. Alright, so that's good. I'm going to control copy this over here. Line these up. There we go. So now we have our buttons there. Let's click off of this, make sure I'm back on object mode. Cool. So now what I need to do is I'll need to obviously duplicate these for those, that's fine. I need to create something here. And again, we look at reference for what those things look like. Let's jump to our reference for the buttons. Okay, stick. And there's a lot of different concepts for this. So something like this where we have some kind of like black controller here and then this black knob with a stick in the middle, right? So I can do that right there. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about this one doing it the same method because I can actually build that off of different elements. So if I go over here to these base shapes, we have base shapes that we can pull from. So if I make a sphere, hit O, there we go. Whoops. There's my base sphere. And then if I go back into this and I go to, let's say, cylinder. There we go. Now we have that. Now we can adjust the size of that by using these dots here, or we can adjust the size over here. Okay. Now we're worried about proportions, so we want to adjust this and be like, all right, so that feels like that could be the size of a controller. And then we have this platform at the bottom, so I can add another cylinder. Pull this down here. Pull this open. Okay, we don't want these facets, so we're going to add more rotational segments, so 64 is a good number here. All right, so now I'm going to take all three of these, group them together, call this joystick, and then I'm just going to position it. Okay, and that top view is where, most of the time we're going to jump into that because we can see directly down and make sure that it's as even as we can get it, by eye at least. All right, so that feels good there. Now let's go here, hit O, pull this down. There we go. So that feels like a joystick. Now I'm just going to control, drag this over here. Again, jump to the top view and slide it over. There we go. And now I just need to get those two other buttons in there. It doesn't matter which one I take, I'm just going to take one of these buttons and just control drag it. Okay, now I'm not in the top view at the moment, I'm just in this perspective view just to get it roughly positioned. And then I jump to the top view and then I move it around. It's actually pretty close. There we go. And then control drag this over here. That's actually pretty close also. Cool. So now we have our buttons on there. I can take this and just control drag this over as well. Get that roughly lined up on that side. And now I need to create some kind of lights up here. Now for these, I'm going to go with something that looks more like a drop light or a flush ceiling light. So something kind of like this, right? But it's going to be like rounded more. Okay, so I need to know how big that hole is going to be. Now I'm going to, again, do using these other shapes. Okay, so I'm going to use, instead of cylinder, I'm going to use tube. Oops, I'm going to keep it down here for now. This one has more dots, so I'm going to drag the dot here, drag the dot there. You can see how I'm creating basically that frame that's going to go around it, like we see in these. Now I'm going to need some sort of light like that, so I'm going to need some sort of shape. So I'm going to go in here, and there is a sphere. Okay, now I obviously don't want to use like this whole sphere. Oops. And I can't really get this, like if I make this huge like this, like that's probably appropriate. Let me just add more segments. Like it's probably an appropriate size. But then I have this huge sphere kind of sticking behind it. Now there's other ways that eventually we'll talk about that we can adjust what that's looking like and how we tweak it. But I'm just going to delete the sphere and just use the spline tool to create that shape. Okay, so I'm going to go into my front view or side view. There it is. Okay, and I'm just going to create a little circular shape right there. And if I go under my spline, my create spline tools, there's actually one called arc. And if we just create it, it's like, there it is. And we can change the radius of this. We can see if there's other kinds of arcs here. So let's say the sector one, the segment one, start angle, end angle. Like that's really not doing anything for us. Ring, that's not really not doing anything either. Okay, there's not really a way to control one direction or the vertical and the other direction happening separately. So I'm going to get this to roughly the right size I need to start, like that. All right, so that feels good there. Okay, I'm going to add some more segments here, so I'm going to put this to, let's say, 20. And then I'm going to hit C. And what C is going to let me do is if I hit C on this arc, and then I hit T for the scale, I can actually just grab the green and just pull that down. Okay, now I'm able to obviously create this kind of rounding here. Go back here to lathe. And now we have that shape. Okay, on this tube, before I start duplicating it, I need more rotation segments, so 64 seems like a good number. I'm going to do... Yeah, I guess that's fine. Okay, that's good. I'm going to grab both of these, lathe and tube, group them together, and then move them up here, rotate it around 180 degrees. Slide it in position. You can see the hole here is way bigger than what I drew. So I need to scale this up. Okay, so I'm just scaling. Again, I'm not clicking on this because that'll only scale in those two directions. I want to click and drag off of it so it's uniform. Okay, that looks good from that view. Let's see when we slide this into position here what it's going to look like. All right, maybe a little bit lower. Maybe a little bit smaller. Let's go to the top view and take a look there. And you'll see you're constantly moving around. Front view, side view, perspective. That's good. We have a little lip here, little rim, and then the light. Cool. So now we can duplicate and slide it over. Should have named it first, but I guess that's just part of learning. There we go. So this is going to be light 1, light 2. Okay, so now we can save, and I'm just going to organize this a bit further and just say, okay, all the buttons here. I'm going to put all the red buttons in one group and all the blue buttons in another. Usually it's like one side, the other side. So I'm just going to organize these by sides. Okay, so those, I'm missing a button. Oh, I have an extra button there. There we go. I'm going to group these, and these are P2 buttons. And then this, Alt G or Option G. This is P1 buttons. Okay, and then this is part of P1. This is that. So I'm just going to Alt G that and say P1. This, that, Alt G, P2. There we go. Okay, so now this is done. So now I'm going to save it, and then you will submit this finished product of your arcade system. I'll only need the Cinema 4D file. I won't need your Illustrator file because I already have that. Not that it matters, but I'll just need that Cinema 4D file. Make sure it's labeled correctly, and then put that into